Hey there, welcome. Before we get into today's story, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing people from all over. Now here's something to think about. Have you ever witnessed or been part of a situation where a wife was caught cheating? Maybe it happened to you, a friend, or someone you know. If you've got a story or thoughts on the topic, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. All right, no more waiting. Let's get right into this story. Long before Robert Stevens found himself entangled in the present storm of confusion and pain, his life had been a delicate balancing act between success and uncertainty. As a promising executive in the telecommunications industry, he had thrived in a world of sharp suits and high-stakes negotiations. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a man who often questioned his own worth. His colleagues admired his keen insight, his ability to predict industry trends before they unfolded, but Robert knew his strength came not from any innate genius, but from the unwavering support of his wife, Peg. She had been his anchor, the quiet force that steadied him when doubt crept in. And yet, in the final months before his disappearance, that foundation had begun to crack. Subtly at first, in lingering glances between Peg and Charlie Ford, in hushed conversations that stopped the moment he entered the room. His instincts screamed at him that something was wrong, but every time he tried to voice his fears, he was met with patient smiles and reassurances that left him questioning his own perception of reality. Then came the accident. The day had been like any other. His usual morning ride, the familiar rhythm of his legs pumping against the pedals, the wind pressing cool against his skin. He had taken the same route countless times before, but that morning, something had felt off. A dark-colored truck had idled at the intersection for longer than necessary, its engine rumbling low and menacing. He remembered catching a glimpse of the driver's face, just a shadowed outline beneath the brim of a cap, before the vehicle lurched forward, its side mirror clipping his head, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. The impact had been brutal, but the true pain had come later, in the sterile white halls of the hospital, when he awoke to find his world forever altered. His memory fragmented, his trust shattered. Robert had found himself drowning in the horrifying realization that the very people he once relied on might have wanted him gone. Robert Stevens lay peacefully in his sleep, a satisfied smile resting on his lips. His arm draped over Peg's body in a familiar embrace, his palm resting gently against her soft curves. The fragrance of her hair filled the air, a mix of perfume and her natural scent. He had always adored that scent. He had longed for it. It had been too long since they had shared a bed, since he had felt her warmth beside him. It felt like an eternity had passed since he last held her. But as his consciousness slowly crept back, something felt wrong. His fingers flexed slightly and the reality hit him. He wasn't holding Peg. Instead, his arm rested across a pillow, his hand gripping nothing but fabric. His eyelids refused to open. Then a sharp, unbearable pain surged through his entire body. Distant noises reached his ears, steady beeping, the rhythmic hum of machines, the shuffle of footsteps, hushed voices. He could feel tubes in his nose, wires connected to his skin, a needle piercing his arm. And everything hurt. A hospital, that had to be where he was. But Peg's scent, it lingered. That part wasn't a dream. She was real. She had been here. Motionless, he lay there, disoriented, his mind clouded by pain. He didn't dare move. The agony was overwhelming. All he could do was wait for whatever was coming next. Then, he heard it. "Hello, Robert," her voice. It was unmistakable. She was truly here. But how? How had she found him? And more importantly, why? A chilling thought struck him. Had she come to finish what had been started? No. He tried to shift, but a brutal wave of pain forced him to stop. "Relax, Robert. It's okay." Peg's voice was soft, reassuring. "You're in the hospital, but you're safe. I found you." He struggled again, desperate to move, but his body wouldn't obey him. "Don't try, sweetheart. You're in a cast, covered in bandages." She hesitated, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Do you remember what happened?" Silence. No, he didn't. And something in him wasn't sure he wanted to. Peg exhaled, her tone laced with sadness. "You were attacked, Robert. A group of men kick you unconscious. Your injuries are severe, broken bones, internal trauma. But the doctors say you'll recover." His mouth was unbearably dry. He tried to speak, but his lips were too cracked, his throat too raw. Seeing his struggle, Peg dampened a cloth and pressed it gently to his lips. The moisture brought momentary relief. "Why are you here?" His voice was barely more than a rasp. How did you find me? Were you the one who sent them? She pulled back as if struck. Robert, how can you even think that? After a brief pause, she stood. I need to let the doctors know you're awake. They'll want to check on you. And I need to call the girls and Charlie. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she turned away. Before she left the room, she spoke quietly to a nurse. I'll be back. We need to talk. Before long, a team of medical staff surrounded his bed, examining him, speaking in clipped professional tones. He endured it in silence, too exhausted to protest. Eventually, Peg was allowed back in. She approached cautiously, her hand resting lightly on his. His eyes remained closed, making it impossible to tell if he was awake. Robert, she murmured, I never hurt you. Why do you think I did? I love you. I always have. Ever since you left the hospital in Columbus, since you left me, I've been searching for you. Not a day has gone by that I haven't wondered where you were. Minutes passed before he finally turned his head slightly toward her. Are you and Charlie still together? His words were barely audible. No, Robert, we were never together, she answered firmly. Charlie has always been just a friend. You are the only man I've ever loved. He turned away again. Lies, that was all this was. Why had she come here after all these years only to feed him more lies? He knew better. And yet, his mind latched onto a different question. Why can't I see? Panic edged into his voice. Am I blind? The doctors said your eyes were injured during the attack, she explained gently. They've been kept bandaged to allow healing. Your vision may be affected, but you won't be blind. Once they remove the dressings, we'll know more. We, she kept saying we. You still haven't told me why you're here, he murmured. I'm here because I love you, she said without hesitation. Because you're my husband. When you disappeared, we searched for weeks. Charlie and I drove through every part of the city, asking if anyone had seen you. We didn't know if you were alive or dead. After your bicycle accident, everything changed. You changed. You weren't the same confident, happy man anymore. You were scared, withdrawn, and we were terrified you wouldn't survive on your own, but we never stopped looking. There it was again. Charlie and Peg. Peg and Charlie. So she had admitted it after all. He wasn't wrong. She thought he was. But I never stopped loving you, she whispered. I never gave up hope that we'd find each other again. His mind was heavy with exhaustion, his body beyond weary. The scent of her, the sound of her voice, it was comforting, but he was too drained to process it all. I need to sleep, he muttered. I'll go back to the hotel, make some calls, freshen up, and return tonight, Peg said softly. She leaned down, brushing a tender kiss against his lips. He didn't respond. He was already slipping into unconsciousness. As she walked past the nurse's station, a doctor approached her. Miss Stevens, do you have a moment? We need help with your husband's medical history, the doctor said. He was brought in a week ago, unresponsive, badly knockin'. He had no identification. The only information we had came from the people at the homeless camp where he was found. They knew him only as Bobby, or the mayor. The police found a scrap of paper with a phone number. That's how we reached you. Peg shook her head, struggling to absorb the doctor's words. Robert was once an executive for a telecommunications company in Ohio. 7 years ago, he had a serious bicycle accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury. He was in a coma for 5 weeks. When he woke up, he was different. Her voice wavered. The injury changed everything. My husband went from a confident, intelligent man to someone scared of the world. He became suspicious of everyone. He was never the same. The doctor nodded. Did he have any pre-existing conditions? Only high blood pressure, but he managed it with medication. After the accident, his physical recovery was remarkable, but mentally, it was much harder. We later found out he had a metal plate in his skull from an old injury, but it was the psychological effects that never fully healed. The doctor made a few notes on his clipboard, his expression thoughtful. When he was admitted, we conducted a full medical evaluation. Aside from severe malnutrition and an urgent need for dental care, his overall physical health was surprisingly stable. However, we haven't had the chance to assess his psychological condition yet. If you don't mind me asking, how did he end up living on the streets? Peg let out a weary sigh, rubbing her temple as if trying to soothe an old ache. After the accident, he underwent extensive rehabilitation, both physical and occupational therapy. We also took him to a psychologist to help with the mental and emotional changes we noticed. The therapy sessions drained him. His physical recovery was impressive, but mentally, she hesitated. He became convinced that Charlie Ford, his best friend, and I had conspired against him, that we had tried to eliminate him. No matter how much we reassured him, he refused to believe us. He was afraid of us. Her jaw tightened. When the hospital was ready to discharge him, he found a way to slip out unnoticed. He disappeared. Charlie, the police, all of our friends, we searched for months, but it was like he had vanished into thin air. Then, 6 days ago, I got the call. Her voice wavered slightly. Thank God he still had my phone number. The doctor nodded, absorbing her words. That helps fill in some missing pieces. As we continue monitoring him, we'll work to understand the rest. But there's something we need to consider. When he realized you were in the room, his anxiety spiked significantly. If this pattern continues, we may have to ask you to stop visiting. Is there anyone else who could be here for him without triggering that reaction? Peg thought for a moment. Maybe one of his daughters. They were just little girls when he left. But now they're adults. He has no reason to be afraid of them. She sighed, her voice tinged with frustration. Of course, he has no reason to fear me either, except in his mind. With that, she left the hospital, heading back to her hotel. Exhaustion clung to her like a heavy weight. Fear, guilt, uncertainty. Her thoughts swirled as she tried to process everything. She had loved Robert, missed him terribly. But over time, life had settled into a routine. His sudden return, this harsh, new reality, threatened to upend everything. And then there was Charlie. 6 days ago, back in Ohio, Peg had been stepping out of the shower, drying herself off when the phone rang. Charlie was sprawled across the bed, his bare skin still damp with sweat. He never cleaned up after himself. That was just Charlie. Crude, unapologetic. Since Robert's disappearance, Charlie had been her rock, her comfort, and eventually her lover. If being with Robert had been soft and tender, being with Charlie was something else entirely. Intense, raw, almost combative. For years she had resisted. Then one night she had given in. Now, after years of sharing a home and a bed, her connection to Robert had faded, while her bond with Charlie had deepened. She wouldn't call it love, not the way she had loved Robert. But what she had with Charlie was different. Robert had been polished, cultured, educated. Charlie barely scraped through high school. He was intelligent, but in a street-smart way, not refined. With Robert, she had spent nights discussing philosophy, attending operas, savoring fine wine. Charlie preferred action flicks and beer, NASCAR and poker. No, Charlie could never replace Robert. Lying back on the bed, Charlie stretched, his voice casual. You know, it's almost been 7 years, he remarked. You could have him declared legally dead. Then we could get married. Peg let out a slow breath, pulling a pair of underwear from the drawer. I don't need a reminder of how much time has passed, Charlie. We've talked about this. She slid them on carefully. I still hold out hope that he's alive. And Charlie, I appreciate everything you've done for me and the girls, but I still see you as a friend, Robert's friend, not my husband. Charlie's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Oh, and don't wipe yourself on my sheets, she added. I don't want stains when I do the laundry. Before he could reply, the phone rang. Peg hesitated, staring at the unfamiliar number on her screen. A nagging instinct told her not to ignore it. After a brief pause, she answered. Hello? A woman's voice came through the line. Mrs. Stevens? Peg tightened her grip on the phone. Yes, this is Margaret Stevens. I'm calling from Oklahoma Medical Center, the woman said. A man we believe to be your husband was brought into our emergency department. He was severely knockin'. This phone number was found among his belongings at a homeless encampment. A woman there identified him as Bobby Stevens. The room seemed to tilt. Peg gripped the dresser for support as the color drained from her face. I'll be there as soon as I can book a flight. She dropped the phone and turned to Charlie, her voice barely steady. Robert's alive. He's in a hospital in Oklahoma. Charlie sat up abruptly, his face unreadable. Peg reached for a suitcase, her hands trembling as she tossed clothes into it. Are you driving me to the airport, or should I call for a ride? She asked without looking at him. I'll take you, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I'll grab a quick shower. She heard the disappointment in his tone. He cared about Robert. He was relieved he was alive. But this wasn't what he had wanted. They agreed that she would go alone first, get a sense of the situation before he made any decisions about coming. Now, sitting in her hotel room, Peg called Charlie. You shouldn't come, she said immediately. He gets agitated when I even mention your name. He thinks He thinks we had something to do with what happened to him." Charlie's voice was tight. "Did you tell him about us?" "No. He's in no condition to handle that." She hesitated, gripping the phone. "Charlie, he's barely holding on. His eyes are bandaged, his body is broken, he's covered in bruises and casts. He suffered a severe concussion, another traumatic brain injury. He's not the same." Charlie exhaled sharply. "Damn it, Peg. I should have been there. Maybe I could have kept him from ending up like this." "That's not how things played out," she replied. "This morning, a police officer came to see me before Robert woke up," she continued, her voice quieter now. "They asked me questions, showed me pictures." She swallowed hard. "Robert was living under a bridge, a homeless camp. Everything he owned was in a shopping cart. He slept on the ground, covered in old blankets he found in the trash." Charlie was silent for a long time. "Jesus." "They found 2 things on him," Peg went on. "A crumpled scrap of paper with my phone number on it, and a family photo from our last Christmas together." Charlie exhaled through his nose. "Well, that's something." Peg's fingers tightened around the phone. "He cut my face out of it." Charlie let out a low chuckle. "Smart guy." "Charlie, don't," she snapped. "This isn't funny. He lost everything, and he didn't deserve any of it. He should have had his life back." Her throat tightened. "I'm just afraid it's too late." She didn't wait for his response. "I need to call the girls. They need to know their father is alive. And Charlie, don't come here. I'll let you know if anything changes." Ending the call, Peg picked up her tablet and set up a Zoom meeting with her daughters. When Robert had vanished, Lisa had been in middle school, just a 7th grader, and Laura had been 1 grade ahead in 8th. Now they were both in college, Lisa at Northern Illinois and Laura at Northwestern. Despite everything that had happened, Robert had been thinking ahead. He had quietly put aside enough money to cover their education, something Peg hadn't even known about until much later. As soon as the call connected, Lisa didn't waste a second. "How's Dad?" she asked urgently. Peg waited for Laura to join before answering. "Your father woke up today," she said carefully. "He's really confused, and he still has the paranoia from after his accident. He's convinced that Charlie and I had something to do with what happened to him." Lisa's expression darkened. "Why would he think that? What did you and Charlie do to make him believe it? Were you 2 together before the accident?" Peg stiffened but kept her voice calm. "I have always loved your father, Lisa. Charlie could never replace him. I don't know how Robert got these ideas, but he did." Lisa, ever the planner, immediately started mapping out a course of action. "I have my last exam tomorrow morning. After that, I can fly out." Laura chimed in, eager not to be left behind. "I can come next week." Later, when Peg returned to the hospital, she was informed that Robert was still undergoing tests with the doctors. She'd have to wait. Deciding to head to the visitor's lounge at the end of the hall, she noticed a woman sitting alone. The woman had a tough, worn look about her. She was younger than Peg, but had clearly lived through hardship. Though she was clean, her dress was old, a relic from another decade, its fabric frayed at the edges. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was simply combed, with no thought given to style or presentation. Sensing Peg's approach, the woman straightened, her posture tense, as if expecting to be told to leave. "They said I could sit here," she blurted defensively. Peg offered a reassuring smile. "Are you a friend of Robert's?" The woman hesitated before giving a small nod. "My friend's name is Bobby," she corrected. "He's the mayor." Peg lifted an eyebrow. "The mayor? There's a mayor here, and you know him." The woman chuckled dryly. "He's not a real mayor. We just call him that because he looks out for everyone. If somebody's in trouble, Bobby helps." Peg reached into her purse, pulling out a photograph. "Is this Bobby?" The woman studied the picture for a moment. "Yeah, that's him. But this is old. He doesn't look like this anymore. He's aged." After a beat of hesitation, she extended her hand. "I'm Mary, Bobby's friend. Some folks call me the deputy mayor." Peg observed her closely, her tired but kind eyes, the weary way she carried herself. With a little care, she could be beautiful, Peg thought. Reaching out, she shook Mary's hand. "I'm Peg, Robert's wife." Mary jerked her hand away as if burned. Her eyes widened in shock, then horror. Covering her mouth with both hands, she whispered, "You're her?" Her gaze flickered toward the hallway, panic rising. "He told me about you, about what you did to him. My God, have you come to finish the job? Please, don't hurt him. I love him. And he loves me." Before Peg could react, Mary's trembling hand disappeared into her satchel. A second later, she pulled out a knife. Rising from her seat, she positioned herself between Peg and the hallway that led to Robert's room. "I won't let you hurt him," she declared, her grip tightening around the handle. He protects me and I protect him. Peg somehow remained calm. Keeping her voice soft, she said, Mary, I'm not here to hurt Robert. I love him too. I want to help him heal. Please put the knife away before someone sees you. I don't want security to come and make trouble for you. Mary's knuckles whitened on the handle. Please, Peg urged gently, sit down and talk with me. I swear I have never harmed Robert and I never will. Mary's chest rose and fell in quick breaths. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. She glanced over her shoulder, debating her next move. Then, reluctantly, she slid the knife under the seat cushion and sat back down. Peg let out a slow breath. Looks like we both care about the same man, she said with warmth. Thank you for looking after him, for being his friend. I've been searching for him for years, ever since he disappeared. Mary's expression hardened. He had to disappear, she muttered, because you and your lover were trying to eliminate him. Peg sighed, her voice patient. Mary, before Robert's accident, he had a wonderful life. He was successful. We had a beautiful home in Ohio, surrounded by friends. We raised 2 daughters together, but then a truck hit him while he was out on his bike. He suffered a traumatic brain injury. When he woke up, he believed that Charlie and I had planned it, that we had tried to get rid of him. She held Mary's gaze. But that isn't true. Charlie was his best friend. Neither of us would ever hurt him, but the injury, it changed how he saw the world. It made him afraid, suspicious. Tell me, is he still like that? Mary softened slightly. I'm the only one he trusts, she admitted. If he needs money, he lets me take his ATM card to get cash for him. And when he has headaches, he won't let anyone else near him. Just then, a nurse stepped into the waiting area. Mrs. Stevens, Robert is ready for visitors now, but only one at a time. She cast a wary glance toward Mary, clearly uncertain about her presence. Mary instinctively tensed, expecting to be turned away. Peg turned to her. Mary, why don't you go first? She suggested kindly. I know Robert would rather see you right now. I still have to earn his trust. Mary's eyes widened in surprise. Really? She whispered. Peg nodded. Thank you, Mary murmured, rising from her seat. She moved toward the hallway with careful, hesitant steps. As she reached the doorway to Robert's room, she paused, sucking in a breath. Seeing him lying there, battered and vulnerable, took her breath away. Robert lay motionless in the hospital bed, his body wrapped in casts, wires, and IV tubes running in every direction. His face was partially obscured by bandages covering his eyes. Mary's breath hitched at the sight of him. Bobby? It's me, she said, her voice trembling. Can you hear me? He stirred slightly, his voice weak and raspy. Mary? He struggled to form the words. How did you get here? She stepped closer, a flicker of pride in her voice. Took the bus, went to the Y, paid $5 for a shower. Then I found a laundromat and cleaned my clothes. Asked a guy at the bus stop for directions. He told me where to go. Robert was silent for a moment before he asked in a low voice, Mary, is she here? She hesitated. Peg? Yeah, she's waiting outside. A sharp exhale escaped his lips. Mary shifted uneasily. I talked to her, she admitted. Showed her my knife. Told her not to hurt you. She promised she wouldn't. Her voice faltered. She said she loves you. Robert's lips parted slightly. And I told her I love you too, Mary whispered. Robert didn't respond. Mary swallowed hard. I never said it before, not out loud. But after what happened, after those men attacked you, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop them, I knew. She hesitated, guilt creeping into her voice. All I could do was run for help. I found Speedy and the others, got them to chase those guys off. But I couldn't stop them from hurting you. Moving closer, she reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against his. Peg seems different than I expected. She let me come in first because she says you still don't trust her. She's right, Robert murmured. His grip tightened slightly. I don't. She told me she never hurt you, Mary said cautiously. She swears she never wanted to. Robert let out a bitter laugh. She says I'm confused, that the accident messed with my head. His voice darkened. But, Mary, I had suspicions before that damn accident ever happened. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the pain radiating through his body. Something wasn't right. I don't know if Peg had a hand in setting me up, but I know for sure Charlie did. He's been after Peg for years. Before Mary could respond, a nurse entered, pushing a medical cart. She checked Robert's vitals and adjusted his IV before glancing at Mary. He needs rest soon. Why don't you let his wife know she can come in for a moment? Robert's jaw tightened. I don't want to see her. She was nice to me, Mary pointed out. I think you should let her visit. Robert was too drained to argue. He lay still as the nurse finished her work. A few minutes later, Peg entered the room. Just a minute, the nurse warned. He needs sleep. Understood, Peg said, stepping to the bedside. Her voice was measured. Robert, I just wanted you to know that Lisa will be here tomorrow. I know you don't trust me, but Lisa loves you. She's been heartbroken ever since you disappeared. Please, be good to her. Robert hesitated before offering a small nod. Will. Peg exhaled in relief. Thank you for letting her come. After a pause, Robert shifted slightly. Can you do something for me? Peg tilted her head. Of course. Take Mary back to camp. I don't like her taking the bus alone. Peg's brow furrowed. Is there anything I should know about her? Robert hesitated before sighing. Mary has schizophrenia. She's brilliant. Graduated from Arizona State, was starting a career as a teacher when she began hearing voices. She lost everything, ended up at the camp 3 years ago. His voice softened. She does her best with her meds, but sometimes she forgets. And sometimes she skips them on purpose because she hates how they make her feel. His expression darkened. The way she was acting today, I'd say she's missed a few doses. She might be slipping into psychosis. Peg nodded, absorbing his words. She told me she loves you, that you love her. We're close, Robert admitted, but we're not together. Peg hesitated. Are you involved with her? Robert gave a tired chuckle. Not in a romantic sense, but when one of us needs relief, we help each other. That's all I'll say. Peg blinked, unsure how to process that. She has such a unique look. What's her background? Robert smiled faintly. It's a long story. Her great-grandfather was a French missionary in China. He believed that racial divisions were the cause of war and that the solution was to blend them. So in each generation, the family had to marry outside their race. Over time, that tradition continued. Mary is part white European, part Chinese, part African, part Samoan, part East Indian, and part Native American. Peg raised her eyebrows. No wonder she looks so striking. Her skin is beautiful. The nurse cleared her throat at the doorway, signaling that visiting time was over. I have to go, Peg murmured. Lisa will be here tomorrow. I'll take care of Mary. Get some rest. She left the room and caught up with Mary as she was heading toward the elevators. Robert asked me to drive you home, she said. Do you mind? Mary looked surprised but relieved. Oh, yes. Thank you. I hate the bus. Always scared I'll miss my stop. Peg nodded. Come with me, but first we need to make a stop. As they stepped into the elevator, Mary started giving Peg directions to the encampment, but Peg held up a hand. We'll go there after our stop. She glanced at Mary. Robert said you have medication you need to take daily. Have you taken it today? Mary hesitated. No, I wanted to stay clear-headed to get here. Do you have them with you? Yes. I don't leave them at camp. Someone would steal them. She patted her bag. Peg reached into her purse and handed her a bottle of water. Take them now. Mary hesitated, but eventually dug through her bag, pulled out her pill bottles, and swallowed her medication. Satisfied, Peg started the car and drove to their first destination, a high-end spa and salon near her hotel. Mary looked uneasy as they stepped inside. What is this? She asked, glancing around warily. Peg smiled. This is for you, a full treatment. Mineral bath, manicure, pedicure, and a haircut. Mary's eyes widened. Why? Because you deserve it, Peg said simply. Now go. Enjoy. She handed a crisp $50 bill to the receptionist. Take good care of her. She's a special woman. She might need a little extra patience. The woman smiled warmly. We'll make sure she's treated like royalty. As Mary was led inside, Peg stepped back out and drove to a nearby department store. She took her time picking out essentials, sturdy jeans, soft sweaters, warm socks, underwear, and comfortable shoes. Practical things. Nothing extravagant, but enough to help. When she returned to the spa, she selected a fresh outfit from her shopping bags and handed it to the attendant. Please make sure she changes before she leaves. A short time later, Mary stepped out from behind the partition, barely recognizable. Her freshly cut and styled hair framed her face. Her nails were neatly polished, and her skin glowed from the spa treatments. She wore a clean dress, and a touch of makeup accentuated her features. But the most striking change was the expression on her face. She was smiling, truly smiling for the first time since Peg had met her. Look at me, Peg. Her eyes sparkled with emotion. I feel beautiful again. Peg and the spa attendants gasped in admiration, offering an outpouring of compliments. "You are beautiful, Mary," Peg said sincerely. "Come on, let's go get something to eat." They headed to a small cafe Peg had discovered a few days earlier. At first, Mary was tense, clearly unfamiliar with dining in a proper restaurant. But Peg's calm presence reassured her. As the meal progressed, she began to relax, savoring every bite. As they finished their dessert, Mary set her spoon down and looked at Peg. "Why are you doing this for me?" Peg met her gaze and smiled. "Partly because you're Robert's friend, and that makes you important to me. Partly because I hate seeing a woman struggle when I can help. And honestly," she exhaled, "because I want to understand Robert's life. I need to know if there's still a chance to rebuild something with him." Mary nodded slowly, processing her words. "Besides," Peg continued, "he told me how much you mean to him. If anything, I should be thanking you." Mary lowered her eyes, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertip. Peg's voice softened. "I flew out here the moment I got the call about Robert. I've been here almost a week, but he only woke up today. Until then, I felt alone. It's nice having someone to talk to." Mary swallowed hard. I haven't had a real friend in a long time." Peg reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. As they walked back to the car, Peg hesitated before speaking. "I hate the idea of you going back to that camp and sleeping on the streets." As they drove through the city, Peg glanced at her. "Would you like to stay in my hotel room tonight? A real bed, clean sheets, no worries?" Mary shook her head. "Thank you, but I can't. I have to watch over my things, and Bobby's too. If I don't, they'll be gone by morning. Besides, I'm used to this life. Out there, no one expects anything from me. No demands, no obligations." Peg studied her for a moment before asking, "Why do they call Robert the mayor?" Mary smiled faintly. "Because he takes care of people. He knows how to get money, so if someone gets into trouble, he helps. Bails them out if they get arrested for vagrancy or panhandling. But if they were stealing or hurting someone, that's different. He won't help them. Says bad luck isn't a crime, but actual crimes come with consequences." Peg nodded thoughtfully. "And what else does he do?" Mary shrugged. "Gives advice. Most of the people in the camp don't have much going for them. Mental illness, obsession, or just making bad choices. Bobby helps them figure things out, settle arguments. He's educated, way smarter than most. When there's a dispute, he acts like a judge, stays neutral, tries to find a fair solution." Peg hesitated before asking, "What happened the night he was attacked? Who did it?" Mary's expression darkened. "Some guys from another camp heard he had money. They came to rob him, but he never carries cash. He only withdraws what he needs. They didn't believe him. And that night I had his card because he sent me to bail Speedy out of jail. He had another migraine and couldn't go himself. Those men thought he was lying, tried to kick the information out of him." She swallowed hard. "I ran to get help. The others chased them off, but by then, it was bad. If we hadn't gotten there when we did, he wouldn't have survived." Peg tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Tell me about his debit card." Mary's shoulders tensed. "Don't know where he got it, but there's always money there. He doesn't use it for himself much, mostly to help other people. The rest of us just scrape by with whatever we can get from begging. But Bobby, he has more. He never says where it comes from or how much is in the account. I'm the only one he trusts to take money out when he can't." Peg frowned. "How does he make money day to day?" Mary considered the question. "Mostly odd jobs. There's a temp agency a couple of blocks from the camp. Sometimes he does landscaping, sometimes painting or handyman work." Peg smiled slightly. "That makes sense. He always took care of our house, kept the yard perfect, fixed everything before it broke." As they neared the overpass where the camp was located, Mary's demeanor changed. She turned toward Peg, voice firm. "You can drop me off here. I'll walk the rest of the way." Peg frowned. "I'd like to see where Robert has been living." Mary shook her head. "Please, it wouldn't be good, for me or for him. Bobby values his privacy." Peg hesitated, then sighed and pulled over. "Okay, Mary, maybe another time." She reached into her purse and handed her a business card. "Here's my number. If you need anything, or if you want me to drive you back to the hospital, call me. Robert doesn't like the idea of you taking the bus alone." Mary didn't respond, but she tucked the card into her pocket. With her bags held close to her chest, she stepped out of the car and disappeared into the shadows beneath the bridge. Peg watched her go, then turned the car around and headed back to her hotel. Mary entered the camp, clutching her bags protectively. The moment she arrived, curious eyes locked onto her. A few men whistled. Sitting on a makeshift crate, Speedy narrowed his eyes. "Where you been? What's in the bags?" he asked suspiciously. Mary didn't flinch. She knew some were hoping she had cash or valuables. "Went to see Bobby," she said firmly. "He's in bad shape. Broken bones, bandages over his eyes. Those creeps nearly eliminated him." A woman lounging nearby smirked. "And the bags? Did Bobby's fancy wife buy you presents?" Mary stiffened. "She gave me a ride, got me some clothes." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the group. "She seems kind," Mary admitted, "but Bobby doesn't trust her." A rough-looking woman let out a dry laugh. "Did you tell his wife you've been keeping his bed warm?" Mary's expression darkened. "I told her the truth. We're friends." Without another word, she turned toward her sleeping area, gripping her bags tightly. A few people followed at a distance, eyeing her things. She pulled out her knife, the blade catching the dim light. "I'm tired. Leave me alone." That was enough. They backed off. Mary unrolled her mat and set her new belongings beside the old. She lay down, knife still in hand, and stared up at the darkened sky. Only when she was certain no one would try anything did she finally allow herself to close her eyes. Mary sat in the dim glow of the campfire, her fingers gripping the rough fabric of her bag. The weight of the day settled heavily on her shoulders. She barely noticed when Speedy wandered over and dropped onto the ground beside her, twirling an empty beer bottle in his hands like a makeshift weapon. "Appreciate you getting me out of there," he muttered, staring at the flames. "You and Bobby are the only real ones. I won't forget it." Mary remained silent, her gaze lost in the darkness. Speedy shifted uncomfortably. "I got your back," he added after a pause. "While Bobby's laid up, I'll make sure nothing happens to you." Mary closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. For the first time in days, she felt something close to safe. Peg sat alone at a corner table in the hotel restaurant, her fingers wrapped around the stem of a half-empty wine glass. The hum of conversation around her faded into background noise. Throughout the evening, a few men had approached her, casually asking if she wanted company. She had turned them all away. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She had told Robert the truth. She and Charlie had never been involved before the accident, but Robert had always suspected that Charlie wanted more. Charlie had been part of their lives for years, a divorce with no children. He had practically become family, spending time at their house nearly every day. He had dinner with them, helped fix things around the house, played with the girls. Lisa and Laura had called him Uncle Charlie. He had loved them like his own. Then, something changed. About 3 months before the accident, he started showing up more frequently when Robert wasn't home. His visits stretched longer, his presence lingering. He stood too close. His eyes held hers for just a little too long. His words became laced with something unspoken. She had always known Charlie had feelings for her. She had always known he wished Robert wasn't in the picture. Charlie was successful, working as one of the top salesmen at a Lincoln dealership. He made good money, but he also knew that Peg came from an affluent family. Though she had never flaunted her background, he understood that one day she would inherit a considerable fortune. Robert had earned a great salary, but they lived beyond their means. Peg had never questioned it. She assumed Robert was good with finances. But Charlie had a different theory. He believed their lifestyle was only possible because of her family's wealth. At first, Charlie's attention had irritated her. She loved her husband. She wasn't looking for a distraction. She had told Charlie as much as gently as she could. But now, sitting here all these years later, she realized she had been too soft. Charlie hadn't taken the hint. He had persisted. His pursuit had become so blatant that it caused tension between them. Robert grew frustrated, upset that Peg wasn't doing more to shut it down. She had tried. Cycling had always been one of Robert's passions, something they had shared from the beginning of their relationship. They spent hours riding through the countryside together, fresh air, open roads, just the two of them. But even that had started to change. Charlie had begun tagging along more and more, always maneuvering himself beside Peg, finding reasons to be close to her. Their easy companionship turned strained. That was why Robert had been riding alone the day a pickup truck drifted into the bike lane, its side mirror striking him in the back of the head. He had been thrown from his bike, his body slamming into a metal pole. Witnesses had called for help immediately, and Robert had been rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. It had all happened so fast. Some bystanders described the truck as blue, others swore it was green. The driver was never found. 7 years had passed since that day, but As Peg sat there, slowly swirling the last of her wine, it felt like no time had passed at all. She remembered the day vividly. Robert had gone for his ride, and she had been alone in the kitchen when Charlie arrived. The girls were out with friends. He came up behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist, pressing his lips to the side of her neck. "We're alone," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "I know you've thought about me the same way I think about you." His hands roamed, fingers grazing her stomach, sliding down her back. "Why don't we stop pretending?" he whispered. "Robert doesn't have to know." He turned her to face him, cupping her chin as he kissed her. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't harmless. It was deep, demanding. His grip tightened, pulling her body flush against his. She resisted. "No, Charlie, no," she muttered, trying to push him away. But then, something changed. His touch, his scent, his heat. Something in her hesitated. Her body went rigid, then softened. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, leading her toward the stairs. And she let him. They had barely made it up the first step, tangled together, when there was a sharp, urgent knock at the front door. She froze. Charlie tried to pull her back, desperate not to lose the moment, but Peg stepped away, her heart pounding as she saw two uniformed officers standing outside. Panic flooded her mind. What were the police doing here? What had she done? With shaking hands, she opened the door. "Mrs. Stevens?" one of them asked. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband has been in an accident. He's in critical condition at Good Samaritan Hospital." Her stomach lurched. "Is he—" She swallowed hard. "Is he going to be okay?" The officer's expression softened. "I don't know the full extent of his injuries, but we don't usually deliver news like this unless it's serious." The world blurred around her. She had nearly crossed a line with Charlie, and Robert, her husband, was in a hospital bed, possibly dying. Her legs buckled beneath her. Charlie caught her, his arms holding her upright. "I've got you," he murmured. Then, turning to the officers, he added smoothly, "I'll drive her there." Inside, he was reeling. Perfect timing, he thought. No one would ever question where I was. But the victory was hollow. As he helped Peg stand, reality crashed in. He had lost his chance. Peg, still trembling, pulled away from his grasp. She grabbed her purse and keys. "You don't want me to take you?" Charlie asked, his voice gentle. "You're in shock." "No, Charlie." Her voice was cold, steady. "I don't want to be near you after what almost happened." She turned and walked to the garage. "Take care of the girls," she called over her shoulder. "I'll call when I know more." Then she was gone. For 5 weeks, Peg had barely left Robert's bedside. Lisa, Laura, Charlie, and a handful of close friends had been there too, taking shifts at the hospital. Robert had undergone multiple surgeries, one to relieve the swelling in his brain, another to implant the steel plate where his skull had fractured. The only thing that had saved him was his helmet. Peg had spent every day in that hospital, waiting, hoping, praying. Now, 7 years later, she blinked down at her empty wine glass, lost in the past. "Ma'am?" The waitress's voice broke through her thought. "Would you like anything else?" Peg exhaled. The restaurant was packed. People were waiting for tables. "No, just the check." She signed the bill, left a generous tip, and stood. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Could you send a bottle of this wine to my room?" "Of course, ma'am." Peg made her way to the elevator, her body weary. But when she unlocked her hotel room door and stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. Charlie Ford lounged in the armchair by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, his lips curled into a knowing smirk. "Surprise, sweetheart," he drawled, lifting his glass in a mock toast. "Miss me?" Peg froze in the doorway, her body going rigid before she slammed the door shut behind her. "Charlie, what the hell are you doing here? I told you not to come." Unbothered, he set his drink down and got to his feet, closing the space between them in 2 strides. "I heard you loud and clear," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her lips before she could move away. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. "But I've spent every day with you for years, Peg. This is the longest we've been apart, and I can't take it anymore. Robert doesn't need to know I'm here. Not yet. Not until you're ready to tell him." Peg placed both hands on his chest and firmly pushed him back. "I'm exhausted, Charlie. It's been a long day, and I don't have the energy for this right now." Charlie frowned, watching her closely, but she didn't waver. "I just want a quiet night," she continued. "A glass of wine, a hot shower, and then sleep. Alone." Her voice hardened. "Charlie, I am Robert's wife. That hasn't changed. I made vows to him, vows I still honor. You were there for me when he disappeared. You helped me through years of uncertainty, and I will always be grateful. But now he's back. He's still my husband, and I intend to be his wife again." Charlie's mouth opened to argue, but she lifted a hand to silence him. "I asked you not to come and you ignored me. So now I'm telling you this. Find another hotel room. Or a motel. I don't care. But you're not staying here." A knock at the door interrupted them. Peg exhaled sharply, stepping past Charlie to accept the bottle of wine from room service. She tipped the waiter and shut the door, finding Charlie still standing in the middle of the room, watching her. "You love me," he said, his voice low, insistent. "And you know I love you. We both know Robert can't be a husband to you anymore. He probably doesn't even want to be. And I refuse to just walk away. I've put too much into this." He sighed, shaking his head with calculated disappointment. "But I won't push you tonight. I'll go get another room. We'll talk tomorrow." He grabbed his suitcase and left without another word. Peg stood there, staring at the closed door, her emotions tangled. The relief of knowing Robert was alive, the guilt of how far she had let things go with Charlie, the fear of what came next. She poured herself a large glass of wine, took a slow sip, then undressed and stepped into the shower. She had always been a problem solver. She would figure this out too. By the time her head hit the pillow, she was asleep. The next morning, Peg avoided breakfast in the hotel dining room, unwilling to risk running into Charlie. She slipped out through the side entrance, got into her car, and drove toward the hospital, stopping at a small cafe along the way to grab a coffee and a cheese Danish. At the nurse's station, she learned that Robert had slept through the night and had eaten breakfast. His doctors were optimistic. His cognitive function was improving, and they were hopeful there wouldn't be lasting damage from his injuries. When she stepped into his room, a nurse was just finishing checking his vitals. As soon as Peg entered, Robert tensed. Even with his eyes still bandaged, his entire body language shifted. His shoulders stiffened, his face set into a guarded expression. "Good morning, love," Peg said softly, stepping closer. She leaned over the bed and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "I hear you're doing better today, that you're getting stronger." Robert's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I feel better," he admitted. "They've cut back the pain meds, so my head's clearer." His voice lost all warmth. "And yet, I'm still confused about one thing. Why are you here?" Peg pulled a chair up beside him. "Because you're my husband," she said gently. "Because I love you. Because I've spent every day for the last 7 years wondering if you were dead or alive. I want to take you home when you're ready. I want us to rebuild our life together." Robert said nothing. A long breath left his lips, slow and measured, like the weight of everything was pressing down on him at once. "I'm tired, Peg. I can't talk about this right now. I need to rest." He turned his head away, his body going still. She thought he had fallen asleep. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Slipping quietly into the hallway, she answered. "Charlie, good morning. I'm at the hospital. He's awake, but he just laid down for a nap." Her voice dropped lower. "No, don't come up here. My presence already unsettles him. Yours would make it worse. I'll head back soon. He clearly doesn't want me here right now. Lisa is coming later. Maybe he'll talk to her." She paused. "I'll call you when I'm back at the hotel." Inside the hospital room, Robert lay still. He hadn't caught every word, but he didn't need to. He knew Charlie was in town, and nothing in Peg's voice had reassured him that his suspicions were wrong. When she returned to the room, she sat in silence. Robert kept his breathing steady, pretending to sleep until the exhaustion finally pulled him under for real. After a while, Peg gathered her things and quietly left. She drove aimlessly, her mind spinning. She wasn't ready to face Charlie. Not yet. But she also wasn't ready to go back to the hotel. Instead, her thoughts drifted to Mary. She needed to understand Robert's life over the past 7 years, why he had chosen to stay away, what Mary really meant to him. Had she replaced Peg in his heart? Or was it truly just friendship, like he claimed? But there was something bigger gnawing at her, something that made her stomach knot. Why was Robert afraid of her and Charlie? Did he really think they had tried to hurt him? That she had been involved in his accident? Charlie had always been relentless, always pressing, always trying to get her into his bed. She had never been naive about his feelings, but Charlie had also been Robert's best friend. Could Robert really believe that Charlie had tried to eliminate him? Where had that idea come from? She needed answers. Peg arranged to meet Charlie for lunch at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Over sandwiches and coffee, they chatted about trivial things, skirting the heavier topic looming between them. For a brief moment, it felt almost normal, almost like old times. But when Charlie finally broached the subject of their future, his tone casual, but his intent anything but, Peg held up a hand. "There's too much uncertainty," she said firmly. "Robert's condition, his memory, what he wants. I don't even know where his head is at. Before I make any decisions, I need to understand why he's afraid of us." Charlie's jaw tensed. "Peg, come on. You know why. He's paranoid. His mind is warped from that injury. I need to hear it from him," she cut in. "Until then, I'm not discussing the future." Charlie's expression darkened, but he exhaled through his nose and gave a tight nod. "Fine." Before long, it was time to head to the airport to pick up Lisa. Peg hadn't seen her daughter since spring break, so despite everything, their reunion was filled with tight hugs and warm smiles. Lisa had always been close to her mother, and after Robert's disappearance, they had leaned on each other even more. As they drove, Peg caught her up. "Your father is awake. The doctors think he'll recover, but something's wrong." Lisa frowned. "What do you mean?" Peg hesitated. "He's afraid of me, and of Charlie. He believes we—" She swallowed, forcing the words out. "Wanted to hurt him." Lisa's eyes widened. "Wait, Charlie? As in Uncle Charlie? The man who moved into our house? The guy who's been sleeping in your bed for the last 7 years?" Peg winced. "Lisa, your father doesn't know about that. When he disappeared, I refused Charlie. But for some reason, Robert believes we were already involved before the accident. And even if he thought that, why would he believe we wanted him dead?" Lisa studied her mother. "Mom, you really don't see it? You don't understand why he might think that?" A cold knot formed in Peg's stomach. "I just hope he'll talk to you. Maybe he'll tell you something he won't tell me." Lisa sighed, crossing her arms. "So you want me to spy for you? Nice." Peg shook her head. "No. I want you to remind him that he has a family, that we love him, that he's not alone. I want you two to reconnect in a way I haven't been able to." Lisa turned toward the window, her thoughts unreadable. "And what about Charlie?" Peg inhaled deeply. "That's complicated." Lisa faced her again, sharp-eyed. "Not really. If Dad comes home, what happens to him?" Peg's voice was quiet but steady. "I told Charlie that if Robert comes home, he has to leave." Lisa gave a dry laugh. "And you think he's just going to walk away? Mom, be honest. He's comfortable. He likes his life with you. He's not going to just disappear." Peg sighed. "I know." Lisa tilted her head. "And if he refuses, then what?" Peg didn't have an answer. They reached the hotel, got Lisa settled in her room, then headed out for dinner. Peg half expected Charlie to be lurking nearby, but to her relief, he wasn't. She and Lisa enjoyed a light-hearted conversation over dinner before driving to the hospital. As they arrived, Peg gave Lisa directions to Robert's room, and then found a quiet corner in the hallway to wait. Lisa hesitated before stepping inside. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I missed you." Robert turned his head slightly, recognizing her voice. "Hey, Pumpkin," he rasped, though the words came out weak. Lisa moved closer, unsure where it was safe to touch him between the casts, bandages, and wires. In the end, she simply kissed his cheek and took his right hand in both of hers. Robert squeezed her fingers lightly. "The hardest part of all this is being away from you and Laura. How are you? Is everything okay?" Lisa smiled, blinking back tears. "I'm just so happy you remember me. Dad, we missed you. We worried about you every single day." She took a deep breath. "Nothing has been the same without you." She spent the next 2 hours catching him up on everything, her classes, her friends, her experiences at college. She told him about prom, about field hockey, about the boys she had dated and the ones she had ignored. She painted a picture of a life he had missed, trying to bring him back into their world. She avoided Charlie's name except to mention how she and Peg had searched for him after he disappeared. If Robert wanted to discuss Charlie moving in, that was a conversation for him and Peg. As much as Robert wanted to listen, exhaustion took hold. His eyelids drooped, his grip slackened, and Lisa sighed, kissing his forehead. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. When she stepped out into the hallway, she saw her mother sitting with a woman Lisa immediately recognized from Peg's descriptions. Mary. Peg looked up. "Lisa, this is Mary. Mary, this is Robert's daughter." Lisa hesitated, taking in Mary's tired, lined face, her wary but kind eyes. Mary offered a small smile. "Mary called me," Peg explained. She wanted to visit Robert, so I picked her up. Lisa nodded, but glanced toward the hospital room. I think I tired him out. He was already drifting off when I left. Mary stood. I'll just sit with him. I don't mind waiting. Peg reached into her purse, pulled out some cash, and handed it to Mary. We can't stay, but please don't wait for the bus this late. Call a cab when you're ready to leave. Mary hesitated before taking the money, nodding her thanks, then slipped inside Robert's room. As Peg and Lisa walked toward the parking lot, Lisa sighed. I did most of the talking, she admitted. Told him about Laura and me, about everything since he left. She hesitated. Sorry, Mom, but he didn't really ask about you. Peg's stomach twisted. And Charlie? Lisa shrugged. I mentioned him in passing, but I didn't bring up our living situation. Peg nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as she drove back to the hotel. Mary sat beside Robert's bed, watching his sleeping form. He looked fragile, vulnerable, so unlike the man she had come to know at camp. Would he recover? Would he come back to their world under the bridge? Or would he return to the life he once had, to his wife, to his children? And why was he so afraid of Peg? She didn't seem cruel, not at all like the woman he had described. She was warm, kind, even generous. None of it made sense. Meanwhile, across town, Charlie paced the floor of his hotel room, phone pressed to his ear. Pedro, I need you here. Take the next flight and bring Maria, he said, voice clipped, impatient. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low chuckle. Things not going well with your lady? Charlie's jaw clenched. I'm not getting a damn thing from this woman.